We're very pleased today to welcome a leading member of the revolutionary left current in Syria, Ghayath Naisse, to speak about Syria today, from war to revolution to war.
Yes.
And he'll speak with a translator, so I'm going to allow him maximum 35 minutes, but then there'll be plenty of time for discussion. So thank you.
Thank you. Good morning for you all. I will speak in Arabic because my English is very bad, or in French, as you like. So next year I speak in English, I think. طبعا الوضع في سوريا اليوم يبدو معقدا لكثير من المراقبين وحتى الناشطين.
The situation in Syria today looks very, very complex to many observers and even for activists.
البعض يقول إنه مجرد نزاع طائفي بين السنة والشيعة، وآخرون يقولون أنه مجرد تدخل إمبريالي وحرب دائرة في هذه البلاد.
Some say that it is simply a sectarian conflict between Sunnis and Shiites, and others say that it is only an imperialist conflict.
أو أنها حرب أهلية.
Or that it is simply a civil war.
ولكن في الواقع الوضع في سوريا اليوم هو كل هذه الأشياء معا، بدون أن ننسى أنها كانت ثورة شعبية في الأساس.
In reality, the situation in Syria encompasses all of these aspects and we must not forget that it started with a popular revolution in the first place.
وعلينا أن لا ننسى هذه المسألة، على أن الثورة الشعبية في سوريا التي بدأت عام 2011 قامت ضد نظام ديكتاتوري وبشكل سلمي خلال عام. نظام ديكتاتوري مارس سياسات نيوليبرالية ومارس قمعا سياسيا ضد كل شكل مستقل من أشكال العمل المدني والسياسي والنقابي في سوريا لمدة 40 عاما.
Okay, so it is a popular revolution that rose up against a dictatorial regime that implemented neoliberal policies and really attempted to suppress any attempt at self-organization, be it political, linked to civil society, and even trade union activity for over 40 years.
لهذا السبب عندما قامت الثورة في 2011، ولا نعود إلى تفاصيلها لأن تحدثنا في السنوات الماضية عن القوى المحركة للثورة السورية، ولكن علينا أن نتذكر أن هذه الثورة عندما قامت 2011 قامت بجو عام في المجتمع السوري هو مغيب عنه القوى السياسية والنقابية المستقلة. في صحراء سياسية كانت.
I'm not going to go over every single detail of the revolutionary process since 2011 because this has been done in previous years. However, it's important for us to remember that this uprising happened in a kind of political desert in terms of there hasn't been any much political self-organization in Syria for a very long time before the revolution.
لهذا السبب عندما كان يوجه نقد لنا في سوريا لغياب قيادة ثورية جاهزة من بداية الثورة واستراتيجية، كان نقدا ظالما لنا، وسأقول لماذا.
And therefore, when we were criticized for the absence of a ready-made revolutionary leadership and revolutionary strategy at the beginning of the revolution, I think that those criticisms were a bit unfair and harsh, and I will explain why.
لأنه في العام الأول من الثورة رغم عفوية الحراك الشعبي خلقت الجماهير السورية الشعبية من الأسفل شكل تنظيمها السياسي وهو لجان التنسيق المحلية، وكانت هي قيادة الثورة ببرنامج اجتماعي وسياسي تقدمي واضح الملامح.
It was the ordinary people and the masses from below that created their own political leadership in the form of the LCC.
local coordination committees.
Yes, the local coordination committees that had a clear political and social program which were progressive.
ولكن ما فعله النظام منذ البداية هو ممارسة عنف شديد، بمعنى فقط للتذكير، وأنا سبق أن قلت ذلك هنا منذ 3 أعوام، أن النظام خلال العام الأول من الثورة قتل 3 أجيال من القادة المناضلين للجان التنسيق المحلية، 3 أجيال.
But what happened is that the Syrian regime's repression was extremely harsh from the very beginning, and even during the first year of the revolution, it managed to basically kill three different generations of LCC leadership.
ما فتح في المجال لوجود جيل آخر أقل تقدمية وأقل خبرة من الأجيال الأولى.
This meant that a new generation that had less experience and less political clarity had to take over forcibly.
ومما سهل أيضا عنفه من جهة بشكل أساسي، وفقدان هذه القيادات الأولى سهل انتقال كتلة كبيرة من المناضلين السلميين نحو حمل السلاح.
And this process encouraged the move of many peaceful activists towards the armed struggle.
ورويدا تحولت الثورة السلمية إلى ثورة مسلحة نتيجة هذا العنف الوحشي للنظام، بمعنى أنه في غاية نهاية العام الأول من الثورة كان هناك 15,000 قتيل من المتظاهرين المدنيين. سلميين.
Yeah, and slowly the process of transforming this peaceful revolution into an armed uprising was really forced by the regime's violence. And we must remember that during the first year, over 15,000 peaceful protesters had been killed.
لا أتحدث عن المعتقلين والمخطوفين، حيث النظام اعتقل عشرات الآلاف من المناضلين والمتظاهرين، مما اضطره إلى فتح ملاعب كرة القدم والمدارس والثكنات العسكرية كمعسكرات للاعتقال. عشرات الآلاف في العام الأول من المعتقلين والمخطوفين.
The regime imprisoned tens of thousands of activists during this first year. It's had to open football stadiums, schools and military barracks and transform them into basically internment camps and prison camps.
لقد تجاوز بكثير ما فعله بينوشي في تشيلي. لا يقارن يعني.
The Ba'athist regime went even further than Pinochet in Chile, and we cannot even compare the two.
Which year? Can you say the year?
2011.
2011.
النقطة الثانية أن هذا العنف وهذا التحول جزء من المتظاهرين إلى حمل السلاح ترافق مع بداية انشقاقات عدد من العسكريين في الجيش النظامي الذين رفضوا إطلاق الرصاص على المتظاهرين السلميين، وظهور ظاهرة الجيش السوري الحر بداية من تموز 2011.
And at the same time, you had many soldiers and officers in the Syrian army who defected because they refused to take part in this repression, and them, along with the revolutionary activists that had become militarized. This is how the Free Syrian Army emerged towards July 2011.
مع حسين هرموش بدايته حسين هرموش الرائد حسين هرموش.
Yes, with notably Hussein al-Harmoush, who was a senior Syrian officer.
فدخلنا في المرحلة المسلحة، وهناك بدأ النظام باستخدام ليس فقط القتل والقنص، استخدام الطائرات وصواريخ سكود والصواريخ بكل أشكالها والمدفعية والدبابات ضد كل المناطق التي تحررت من الجيش السوري الحر.
And this is when the regime did not restrain itself to shooting protesters, etc. It began a campaign of basically mass destruction using the air force, missiles, bombs, etc. Against all the regions that had been freed by the Free Syrian Army.
فكانت سياسة النظام تجاه المناطق الثائرة المحررة بين قوسين والثائرة هي سياسة الأرض المحروقة.
So it was very clearly a scorched earth policy against the revolutionary areas.
يعني هذه تشبه ما فعله الروس في تشيشان. يعني.
This is very close to what the Russians did in Chechnya in the 1990s.
بمعنى أن النظام فعل كل ما بوسعه لتحطيم البنية التحتية في هذه المناطق، المدارس، المشافي، كل المراكز الحياة اليومية للسكان وبيوتهم أيضا، ودفع نحو تهجير السكان منها يعني.
So this means that the regime did everything to completely destroy and obliterate the socio-economic infrastructure of those regions. We're talking about schools, hospitals, and people's houses as well, and really provoked the mass exodus.
وهنا بدأنا نلحظ على أن الجيش السوري الحر كان يمكن أن يمثل كان الرجل الأخرى للثورة السورية الشعبية.
The Free Syrian Army could have been another aspect of the popular revolution.
فكانت هناك مظاهرات سلمية ترافقها وجود حماية فعلا للمقاتلين الجيش السوري الحر اللي كان ظاهرة محلية في الواقع.
So you'd have peaceful demonstrations that were protected by armed men from the Free Syrian Army that was still at this time that had a very local character at this time still.
وكانت كتلة كبيرة من الجماهير السورية تعتقد فعلا بإمكانية أن بين المظاهرات الشعبية والجيش السوري الحر كمقاومة شعبية يمكن إسقاط النظام، وهذا هو الشكل الاستراتيجي لمواجهة النظام.
So many in Syria believed that the strategic path to overthrowing the regime was through this combination of peaceful demonstration and armed popular resistance embodied in the FSA.
ولكن كان هذه الظاهرة بمعنى المظاهرات الشعبية، الحراك الشعبي من جهة والجيش السوري الحر كانوا بحاجة إلى دعم حقيقي لمواجهة الآلة الهائلة العسكرية للنظام الذي بدأ يعتمد أيضا على مساندة حلفائه إيران وحزب الله.
But this kind of duo of popular demonstrations and armed resistance actually needed help, especially to confront the regime's destruction machine, and especially after the regime started getting help from its own allies, Iran and Hezbollah.
لأن الجيش السوري الحر يعني المقاومة الشعبية المسلحة عام 2012 حررت 60% من الأراضي السورية بإمكانياتها الضعيفة، فقط من أغلبها من السلاح الذي صادرته من الجيش السوري الرسمي.
In 2012, the popular resistance, the FSA, was able to liberate about 60% of the Syrian territory, in spite of their very meager armament that was at the time still mainly from looting of the official Syrian army.
بخلاف ما يحكى كثيرا بوسائل الإعلام وبعض المحللين، الجيش السوري الحر في تلك الفترة 2013 لم يلقى أي دعم يذكر لا من الدول العربية الإقليمية ولا من الدول الغربية.
Yeah, in spite of what we could read in newspapers and even from some analysts, the Free Syrian Army in 2012 still hadn't gotten any serious aid, be it from regional countries, neighboring Arab countries, or from international powers.
بالعكس ما حصل عام 2012 أثار الذعر عند الدول الإقليمية، كانت إيران ولا السعودية ولا تركيا والدول الغربية، باحتمال انتصار الثورة الشعبية، باعتبار الثورة الشعبية في سوريا تشكل تهديدا على هذه الدول الإقليمية والدولية. هذا نموذج مرفوض كان.
In reality, the prospect that we had in 2012, which was the victory of a popular revolution against the regime, really terrified all the regional and international powers. So this includes Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, etc. So there was a very clear refusal of this possibility of a popular victory against Assad.
وفي هذه اللحظة نلاحظ على أن هناك توافق غير مكتوب ما بين النظام وهذه الدول الإقليمية. كيف يمكن إجهاض أو تحويل حرف هذه الثورة الشعبية عبر فتح الباب للجهاديين التكفيريين، وسأقول كيف.
So in reality, there was an implicit agreement between the regime and all the regional powers to attempt to really deviate this revolution, and this was mainly made through helping the introduction of jihadis to the process, and I will explain how this happened.
فالنظام أفرج بدءا من أيار 2011 خلال أشهر عديدة على مئات من الجهاديين الذين كانوا في سجونه.
The regime freed starting from April 2011. From May 2011, started freeing hundreds of jihadists that were in its prisons.
وهو يعلم أنهم سيخرجون ليس من أجل أن يلعبوا كرة قدم بل لتشكيل مجموعات جهادية للقتال فورا.
And the regime knew very well that they weren't going to leave prison to go play around. They were going to leave prison to form jihadist armed groups.
وكل المجموعات الجهادية التي تشكلت في سوريا، حرار الشام، جيش الإسلام، جيش العزة وجبهة النصرة، كل قادة هذه المجموعات كانوا في سجون النظام السوري.
And all the main jihadist factions that were formed, be it Ahrar al-Sham,
جيش الإسلام، جبهة النصرة، جيش العزة,
the Nusra Front, etc.
كلهم كانوا
all their leaders were actually in Assad's prison a year before.
هو الأفرج عنهم.
Yeah, and they were all freed by Assad himself.
من جهة أخرى قطر والسعودية بشكل أساسي، قطر في البداية وتركيا دعموا أيضا المجموعات الجهادية كأداة لسياساتهم داخل سوريا، للنفوذ داخل سوريا.
At the same time, the Gulf, especially Qatar at first, and Turkey helped those jihadist groups and wanted to use them as vectors of their own interests and their own policies inside of Syria.
تركيا والسعودية لاحقا يعني في 2013.
And later, starting 2013, Saudi Arabia joined this process as well.
وكانت المعركة الأساسية في تلك الفترة 2012-2013 هي بين القوى الجهادية من جهة ضد الجيش الحر إجهاضه، وأيضا النظام الذي ركز على الجيش الحر من جهة أخرى. يعني كان الجيش الحر بين نارين.
Really, at this time, the Free Syrian Army was between a rock and a hard place, because in many places it was fighting against those jihadis, and on the other side, the regime was actually focusing on the Free Syrian Army and not on the jihadis.
وأنا بهذه المناسبة أريد أن أؤكد أن نحن في المنظمة شاركنا في الكفاح المسلح في هذه الفترة في سوريا الشعبية.
And during this time, we as a revolutionary left current took part in the armed struggle.
فما جرى النتيجة الأخيرة هي على أنه على الصعيد الميداني العسكري أصبح لدينا طرف ضعيف هو الجيش المقاومة الشعبية المسلح، الجيش السوري الحر، مقابل طرف قوي أكثر فأكثر هو القوى الجهادية والنظام السوري. هذه المعادلة الآن.
So the situation shifted towards one where we have one weak side, which is the armed popular resistance, which is embodied in the FSA, and two much stronger sides, the jihadis and the regime.
وانعكس ذلك على انحسار أكثر فأكثر للحراك الشعبي السلمي، المظاهرات هذه مربوطة مع تلك يعني.
Yeah, and this process was really linked with the retreat of the popular movement.
رغم أنها لم تموت حتى اليوم الحراك الشعبي.
Even if the popular movement hasn't completely died even today.
هذه اللحظة 2013 يعني 2013 بدأ هنا بشكل علنا التدخل الإمبريالي أكثر فأكثر، وبالذات مع سقوط الموصل ومن ثم الرقة في سوريا وتشكيل التحالف الدولي 2014 بقيادة الولايات المتحدة بشكل علني، تدخل علني إمبريالي.
And it was 2013 that really opened the door for very obvious imperialist interventions, which really started in a very obvious way after the fall of Mosul and Raqqa to the Islamic State, and the formation of the US-led coalition against ISIS.
وتلاه بعده بعام يعني سبتمبر أكتوبر العام الماضي التدخل الروسي العلني المباشر بحجة مكافحة الإرهاب أيضا، كلهم بحجة مكافحة الإرهاب.
Yeah, and this was followed in last September 2015 by the Russian intervention under the justification of fighting terror. They all intervene to fight terror officially, terrorism.
اليوم ما هي الصورة العامة في سوريا باختصار يعني، وأترك المجال للأسئلة الكثيرة التي ستطرحونها أتمنى ذلك.
This is the general picture in Syria today. Of course, we can discuss it in more details during the discussions, or if you have any questions.
من جهة هناك يمكن القول نحن أمام صورة تشبه صورة الشرق الأوسط لعام 1916 سايكس بيكو.
The picture today is quite reminiscent of 1916 and the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
بمعنى الدول الإمبريالية الكبرى تحاول إعادة تشكيل منطقة بأكملها وتقاسم النفوذ بينها وبين بعضها.
In the sense that the great imperialist powers are attempting to maybe recarve the region or reform it according to their conflicting interests.
وأيضا في سايكس بيكو ننسى بتلك الفترة على أنه هناك كان في ما يسمى بالثورة العربية الكبرى أيضا يعني حصلت بنفس السياق يعني وتم إجهاض لها يعني بإعادة توزيع النفوذ بين الدول الإمبريالية.
And we must remember that during the Sykes-Picot historical process, there was also what was called the
Great Arabic Revolution.
Yeah, the Great Arab Revolution that was really undermined by this by these imperialist rivalries to carve up the region.
فإذا هناك نوع من التنازع يعني التنافس الإمبريالي في المنطقة والتنافس بين القوى الإقليمية الكبرى إيران، تركيا، السعودية في المنطقة. وجهة نظري أنا الخاصة أعتقد على أن الإمبرياليتين الأمريكية والروسية متوافقتان إلى حد ما على توزيع النفوذ فيما بينهما بما يخص سوريا. هذا رأيي الشخصي.
And at the same time, today we have a rivalry between regional powers, and most especially Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey. And it is my own personal opinion that the large imperialist powers, that is the US and Russia, are very largely agreeing on the rough line to take on the Middle East.
مشكلتهم الأساسية هذول الاثنين the great two great powers، مشكلتهم الأساسية هي الدول الإقليمية الحليفة لهم.
The problem of those great imperialist powers actually lies in their own regional allies that have conflicting interests.
كمثال روسيا مصالحها في سوريا ليست تماما كمصالح إيران في سوريا.
So, for example, Russia and Iran, although they are officially fighting on the same side in Syria, they do not have the exact same interests on the ground in Syria.
روسيا تريد أن تعود كدولة كبرى عظيمة لها منفذ في البحر المتوسط، لها قاعدة عسكرية، مصير المنطقة لا يمكن أن يقرر بدونها، تستعيد أوكرانيا ما حصل معها في أوكرانيا. إذن في استعادة لدور دولي لروسيا، بينما إيران مصالحها أخرى.
So Russia is really attempting to re-emerge as a leading imperialist power, and Syria is very important because it provides it with access to the Mediterranean, and it's very important for Russia to keep its military base on the Syrian coast, and this can be seen in a similar process as what happened in Crimea, so the access to the Mediterranean, etc. While Iran has different interests of its own.
إيران سوريا مهمة لها لأن إيران لها نفوذ في العراق كدولة إقليمية، لها نفوذ في العراق وفي لبنان عبر حزب الله. سقوط سوريا يعمل لها قطيعة في هذا القوس للنفوذ الإيراني في الشرق الأوسط، وهذه مشكلة كبيرة بالنسبة لها.
Iran has a strong influence in Iraq and in Lebanon through Hezbollah, and losing its influence in Syria would be problematic.
السعودية مصالحها مختلفة مثلا حتى عن تركيا التي حليفتها. في مشكلة بين تركيا والسعودية رغم أنهم حليفين أنهم يتنافسان على دور الدولة الإقليمية بين قوسين السنية في المنطقة.
So on the other side, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, although they are apparently on the same side, there is also a rivalry between them as who will emerge as the leading Sunni power in the region.
حزب الله تدخل في سوريا له اعتباراته الداخلية أيضا. حزب الله سقوط النظام السوري الذي هو حليفه يعني أنه أصبح محاصرا داخل حدود لبنان الضيقة وتشكل خطر يعني وجودي له. نحن نتفهم ذلك يعني.
Hezbollah on the other side has its own internal Lebanese considerations in this turmoil, but also would not want to see Syria fall because it would really restrain it to the very small Lebanese borders, and we understand that it would that Hezbollah considers that this would constitute an existential threat to it.
باختصار في هناك مصالح أخرى وتنازعات أخرى اقتصادية وجيوسياسية وإلى آخره. المهم على أن الدولتين الأكبر لهم مشكلة مع حلفائهم في الدول الإقليمية، وبالتالي مثلا كثير مهم ما حصل لاحقا مثلا قبل أيام بالتحول في الموقف التركي مثلا في إعادة المفاوضات والتفاهم مع روسيا سيكون له انعكاس على الوضع السوري.
So in a nutshell, there are of course very other small conflicts in the region, but so again the main obstacle in the face of the US and Russia is their respective regional allies. And in this context, the recent rapprochement between Turkey and Russia is going to have important consequences, I believe.
باختصار لأن عندي 5 دقائق فقط. باختصار شديد، إذن هناك في تدخل إمبريالي، في نزاع طائفي، في تدخلات إقليمية، في دول، في قوى تكفيرية مهيمنة على المشهد العسكري، وفي حراك شعبي ما يزال قائم. في كل لحظة لاحظنا يخف في القصف والقتل والسلاح، تخرج الجماهير مرة أخرى وتحتل الشوارع، ومثال معرة النعمان التي تتظاهر فيها الجماهير منذ أكثر من 100 يوم ضد جبهة النصرة وغير جبهة النصرة، مثال على أن الحراك الشعبي ما يزال حيا ولو كان ضعيفا.
Okay, so we have imperialist rivalries, sectarian strife, regional rivalries in Syria. We have the jihadists who very largely are hegemonic on the military front against the regime, but at the same time we have a popular movement that is not quite dead yet and is simply seems to be waiting for for the stop of the military operations to kind of re-emerge. And an example of that is the town of Ma'arrat al-Nu'man, which has been seeing demonstrations for over 100 days now against the Nusra Front with the original slogans of the Syrian revolution.
وشاهدنا أيضا تحركات شعبية في المناطق تحت نفوذ النظام، كان في السويدة ولا في السلمية ولا حتى في اللاذقية نفسها.
And we have also seen popular movements in regions that are controlled by the regime itself, whether in Suwaida, in Salimiyya, or even in Latakia on the Syrian coast.
في هذا الصراع إذا السوري بدي أختصر يعني سريعا الآن بالتدخل الإمبريالي هذا النزاع أصبح نزاع دولي بمعنى إذا كان هناك من صراع طبقي فهذا الصراع الطبقي هو صراع دولي. الجماهير الشعبية السورية التي لم تهزم تماما بعد تحتاج إلى موازين قوى على الثوريين والطبقات العاملة في أوروبا وغيرها أن تعمل لتعزيز لصالحها.
And so the struggle in Syria has become, of course, extremely internationalized, and what the popular masses in Syria need today, and what the popular movement in Syria that is not quite dead yet needs today, is a shift in the balance of power, in the international balance of power, and the European working classes and the European left can play a role in this, in undermining the imperialist powers.
انتصار لكم وهزيمتنا هزيمة لكم سبق أن قلت ذلك منذ 3 أعوام وأعيد اليوم.
Any victory that you can score here is a victory for us in Syria, and any defeat for us in Syria is a defeat for you here. I've said this 3 years ago, and I'm repeating this today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ghayath. All right, I'll open the meeting up now to contributions. If you indicate that you want to speak, I will make a note of everyone. Please come to the front to speak because the meeting is being recorded. And I'll start over here. You had to go to that one, sorry.
Thank you very much for that very, very interesting analysis of what is obviously a very complicated situation. It's been so complicated that I think a lot of people have been inclined to simply dismiss it, but clearly it's something that is absolutely vital internationally. And what I found the most positive about your analysis is the fact that it certainly vindicates the view that the SWP has taken in our recent referendum, and indicates that the work of the working class generally is going to be very, very supportive in Syria. And I think that is absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a few quick points. I mean, on the left in Britain, and I think particularly among the student left, Kobani and West Kurdistan's seen as a model sort of society, and people talk about it as though it's almost like a utopia and so on. So I was just wondering what the current situation is in terms of the Kurdish movement in Syria, predominantly because I've heard that obviously that a lot of the actions that are taken are backed up by the US military. So this is quite a strange situation for the sort of left-wing movement to be in. But also that I think the other side of that is that I think the Free Syrian Army originally hasn't pushed support for Kurdish autonomy, and this has meant that the traditional forces that represent Kurdish people have maintained their sort of dominance over the Kurdish issue. My other question is that in terms of the counter-revolution in Egypt and counter-revolutions in terms of the Arab Spring, how does this fit into the analysis of the Syrian revolution?
Thank you.
Yes, a colleague of mine at work is a very good guy, good on the left part of the union, etc. But he argues that, in fact, Russia, Russia's actions inside Syria are broadly something we should support. That the Russian invasion, my mate argues, is the only force, in fact, he says, that can stop ISIS, and that once having done that, we could then move, he would hope to see the country moving towards free elections, he says, which he openly says to me and anyone else who wants to listen. He hopes that Assad would win the free elections and that then there would be some kind of stability. I'm only mentioning it because I'm sure if my mate, who's typically good person and not an old Stalinist by any means, about half my age, I'm sure this idea is out there in other people's heads as well. To sort of get around to this stage of thinking, which he gets from the RT channel, by the way, the pro-Putin channel that anyone with a TV set can access. He says that the movement was probably not a genuine one in 2011, but was manipulated into place by the West, by Western imperialism. I think the point is that people will look at the damage, the carnage, the wreckage caused by the US invasion inside Iraq and draw the conclusion that my enemy's enemy is my friend. Anything that looks like it's mighty enough to oppose US imperialism in the Middle East, perhaps we should support. That's where my mate is coming from. But in actual fact, Russian imperialism is there for very standard imperialist reasons. I mean, just to look at the huge base that they've now established at Latakia, you don't need any detailed knowledge of Syrian politics or geography to see that this is something that they hope is a permanent thing. They hope to have established a more or less permanent military foothold in the country. And also the show of force, which is what it was, the demonstration of Russian might around the so-called liberation of the city with the temple in it. I'm sorry, but I've forgotten the name of the city. Yeah, Palmyra, of course. Really a Russian show of force. I think we have to say quite plainly to people who are tempted to support Putin and Russia's adventurism there, we have to say quite plainly that we don't support either of the imperialist camps, but that we hope for a revival of the popular movement, which has been put before us today in the talk. We hope for a revival of the popular movement that can beat both imperialisms and take things forward in the region.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Mirfat and I'm from Aden, from South Yemen. We celebrated by the end of 27 of this month, we celebrated the end of the war on Aden. I wrote a few articles in the Socialist Work and Socialist Review about it, but it's the situation in Yemen quite closer to what happening in Syria. You get the Shiite part of the rebel who's called Houthi, supported by Iran and the other side. And we did have a popular resistance started from 2017 that actually people of the South wanted independent. By the way, the Southerners actually supporting the Leave vote, because we don't believe in unity. We suffered a lot from unity of the two Yemens, and there was struggle to end that unity from 2007 as protests and so on. So it's probably the few first movement in the Middle East for a bit of freedom. So what happened is by the start of the Arab Revolution, the movement for independence in the South started to get stronger and confident. And with what happening in the North Yemen as well, we managed to get rid of Ali Abdullah Saleh. But what happened is the Saudi Arabia intervention at the moment, they supported. As the Syrian example, they're really late to support the southern independent movement because they knew if a genuine popular resistance get armed, they will be arming to have a better society. At the moment, we've got a very, very corrupt, fragile puppet government supported by the Saudi Arabia. We've got the rebels supported by Iran in the north and Sana'a. So Aden basically sort of split, and then here we go. The ISIS examples or Al-Qaeda or whatever, they suddenly popped out of nowhere. They have no traditional in that country. So you get a similar scenario in Yemen. But I've got a lot of hope in the southern movement because they've got a history of resistance. You've got a very long history and preparation, probably a bit more than the Syrian. Still, we've got a very, very strong control by Iran in the north and Saudi Arabia in the south to try to keep the country as worse as possible, and people are struggling daily. So, I wanted just to put that through to inform you. There's a lot of things happening, although we don't hear a lot about Yemen that much. But I think there is a positive resistance there. People still believing in having a better life for themselves and having independence for the South. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Frank from Berlin. We had, since there's open intervention from both great powers, from the US on the one hand side with their coalition, and on the other hand side the Russians, we really have the conflict on a new level. You could see it last November when a Russian aeroplane was shot down by the Turkish army, and I mean it's a really dangerous situation. We could see that. I'm so happy that Ghayath was so concentrating on this inter-imperialist conflict, because I mean, if the Russian would have reacted, it would have could have been considered as an attack against a NATO country, and suddenly you have an international war. And if we look at the history, I mean, this is how the international wars in the past started. So it's a very dangerous situation, and so we have to be very clearly focusing on this, because what is the other narrative? The other narrative is that everyone goes in to stop Daesh, to stop ISIS. And I was wondering, they are bombing this country for 2 years now against ISIS, and they are still there. And then if you look to the details, for example, the German ruling class, I mean, they hadn't been in the Middle East now since the Second World War. Now the so-called war against ISIS allows them to be the second-range power next to the US, going with them. And then suddenly there was a decision not just to support the bombing, but actually to build up a permanent base in Incirlik in South Turkey, with lots of money, for have a permanent presence there. So what you can see, we have to ask, what will happen once ISIS will be out? I mean, at one point, I mean, it's not sustainable what they are doing. They are in a world war actually against. It's all flattened. But then the world powers are there with their conflicting interests, and the war will just keep on and keep on and keep on. So the idea or the hope that some might have that after this ISIS is a problem, it will be finished. No, it won't be finished. The people will get, there is a mass exodus, you have this destruction, you still have the regime, and then you have the conflicting interests here. So it's very important that we say the fight against ISIS is not the main issue, but the driving force is the inter-imperial conflict.
Thank you. No.
I wanted to pick up on a couple of points that were made in the discussion. Firstly, in relation to the comrade who raised the misconceptions about the Ba'athist regime in Syria, which are subscribed to quite enthusiastically by a small layer of people on the left here, particularly the old left, but actually have a relatively wide audience for a number of reasons, largely, I think, because of the despair that people feel about seeing, as the comrade rightly said, the level of destruction in Syria, and clutch desperately at anything that they feel could apparently provide an alternative. We have to be extremely clear about the nature of the Ba'athist regime in Syria, and I would, not only for the reasons because I co-wrote this pamphlet, but because I think the argument is very well contained in it, urge people to get copies of this pamphlet, because it actually goes into the history of the relationship, the very long, decades-long relationship between the USSR, the Soviet Union, and the Ba'athist regime from the 1960s onwards, and particularly cemented after 1970, when Hafez al-Assad, the father of the President al-Assad, came to power in a coup. The other point that I wanted to emphasise as well is in relation to the comrade who raised the issue about the relationship with the Egyptian revolution. And again, I think this is an extremely important point to emphasise, that the Syrian popular uprising, the revolutionary uprising that took place in 2011 was part of this great wave of uprisings and revolutions that rolled across the Arab world. And it arose for largely the same reasons, although in a different context. It arose because people were frustrated about being suffocated by political dictatorship, which was incredibly brutal, actually had a much higher level of violence and brutality than the Egyptian regime. So in 1982, the Hafez al-Assad's regime almost wiped out the town of Hama after an Islamist-led uprising there and killed tens of thousands of people, probably. The levels of violence, it did a kind of dress rehearsal for the horrific violence that it committed after 2011, 30 years previously. So that also has to be brought into the picture. But there was also a component of people's frustration and anger about neoliberalism, because despite all this rhetoric about socialism and defending some kind of state capitalist model, actually Hafez al-Assad and then his successor Bashar were enthusiastically embraced the neoliberal orthodoxies of the time. They obviously were implemented this in a specifically Syrian context, and with the state still playing a huge role in the economy, but it's a complete myth to say that there is somehow some kind of more egalitarian society that was being defended by this horrible regime. So, that I think is absolutely crucial. And the final point to make is actually again about the role of the working class. That we can see that sadly because of the lack of that period of self-organisation and on the Syrian side in terms of working class organisation, that you didn't have that defence against the slide into sectarianism and civil war. That's a crucial part of the picture, and that I absolutely agree with Ghayath that we need to look to the future of a future revolution in Syria. We have to look at one that is constituted with the working class at the centre of it, and to look to that rather than any kind of gyrations between the two imperial powers for our strategy.
I actually have a comment and question in Arabic from a friend who's a Syrian activist in Greece who's unable to cross the border. He agrees with Ghayath on most points, but has this to add.
Okay, so it's a question on
about extremist Islamists and moderate Islamists and so on.
Okay, about the difference between extremist Islamists and moderate Islamists. So Ghayath will address this. Okay, yeah, it's a bit of a pedantic question on degrees of jihadism. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the argument raised about Russia and the role of Russia, because it is one that comes up often within the anti-war movement and the left in Britain, it's particularly in the last year or so, and common not just amongst people, as somebody described, who would say they are Communist Party people. It comes, there are other sections of the left that do have illusions that Russia is in some way some sort of bulwark against imperialism, against ISIS, and therefore, maybe they don't go around saying, yay for Russia, but there is illusions that this perhaps is a solution. And I agree that this reflects a pessimism about the possibility of ordinary people winning. And when you have people saying, we need a strong state to crush ISIS and everything else, well, what's the strongest state around? It is the Assad regime. So in many ways, you're just saying that they're right to support Assad. And I think that where this is rooted in, initially, the wrong analysis of the Assad regime at the very beginning of this process, because there was clarity when there was the Egyptian revolution, the Tunisian revolution, all the left cheered those. When it came to Libya and Syria, there was some of the left had illusions in those regimes as representing sort of anti-imperialist states or states that had stood up to imperialism in some way, and therefore felt conflicted, if you like, about the revolutions in some way, that perhaps they were tools of imperialism, maybe not consciously, but they were going to bring down regimes that the West didn't like, and that was going to be helpful to the Western. And this is an ongoing argument that many of us have probably come across, but I think that, you know, whether or not the young guy that the comrade talks to is, you know, young and everything else, he is still falling into, I mean, it's something I'll talk about in a meeting tomorrow on anti-imperialism, but campism, a sense that actually looking to another state as being something progressive as a future way, it is very much comes from that sort of Stalinist Communist Party view. And I think for us as socialists here in Britain, we have to do two things. One, we're active and central in Stop the War coalition, and absolutely right. And as Ghayath pointed out, what we can do best here, of course, analyse and understand what's going on in the Middle East, but what we can do best here is organise against our own government. So we fought to stop them going into Syria in 2013, and we won, but we lost the argument in December. Why did we lose it then? I mean, in terms of Parliament, it was because Labour, you know, the complete disgusting sight of people fighting for yet another intervention on the Labour benches, but we did see opposition. That's our job, and that means we will unite with people who may have all sorts of illusions and differences of opinion on Syria and the revolution, but we are united in a principal opposition to our government. But the second is absolutely clarity about the revolution, that it is a popular revolution against a government, that of course the West is intervening and backing other groups, etc. But the core of that revolution began as a popular revolution. And Russia, although a smaller imperialist power, is not our ally, is not the ally of the Arab masses, is not the ally of anybody fighting for a better world. Far from that, it's something that we have to say is no friend of ours and no friend of the Arab masses.
Thanks. My name's Chris Breen from Solidarity in Australia. One of the ways that we can show solidarity with Syria in the West, as well as opposing Western bombing, is the question of refugees, particularly opposing the abhorrent EU deal with Turkey, which is locking refugees out, because it does raise the question of why people are fleeing in the first place. And people flee Western bombs just as they flee Assad's barrel bombs, and the two things go hand in hand. In Australia, where I'm from, our government is spending $500 million in the war in Iraq and Syria. At the same time, it is spending $2 billion to detain refugees in offshore camps, and that includes Syrians who've been imprisoned there for over 2.5 years. There's one man I know who returned voluntarily rather than be there for 2.5 years, who was then bombed when he was back in Syria. And there's been quite a crossover in the refugee movement in Australia. There's group Syrians for Freedom who come and speak at refugee rallies. We go and speak at the anti-war rallies. And victories for refugees are victories for for Syrian revolution, just as a defeat, as Ghayath was saying, would be a defeat for us. Thank you.
Imperialism's at the heart of the horror in Syria, and it's right that people have emphasised Russia and the sub-imperialisms, Turkey and Qatar and so on in the meeting. At the same time, it's odd to have a meeting that discusses imperialism so much and barely mentions the United States, when, if you were at a meeting with Tariq Ali at Marxism yesterday, he talked about the overwhelming power of the United States and so on. And what Syria illustrates is the relative weakness and impotence of the United States, which would want to dictate the terms of a settlement and dominate in Syria and so on. If you think back to the first Gulf War, those of you who can remember it, in the early 1990s, when the US rolled over Saddam's forces and on the road to Baghdad destroyed 200,000 troops in his army, bulldozing them into trenches and so on, and compare it to Iraq today, where after more than a decade's occupation of Iraq, the US had to withdraw, leaving the country, destabilised, in turmoil, the region destabilised, and so on. That illustrates the relative impotence of the United States. So I wonder if, in returning, Ghayath could say something about the US in Syria, and also what the prospects are. What is Assad now hoping to achieve? A divided Syria? Does he feel that do their forces with Putin feel they can crush the revolt entirely, and so on? And what are the prospects for an end to the horror, and the prospects of some sort of civil society and protest again developing?
Right, I'm sorry, this will be the last contribution from the floor.
Hi, mine's just a question. I read somewhere that now, because of what's going on, that they're going to actually go into Syria for the Golan Heights and drill for oil, genie oil. And I'm just wondering if that's true. And if that's true, does that explain a bit about like the US behind it, or do you think it's just opportunistic? Genie oil. Genie oil. In the Golan Heights, yeah.
Okay, and I'd ask Ghayath now to sum up the meeting.
طيب طرحت أسئلة كثيرة طبعا وملاحظات مفيدة جدا، يعني أنا استفدت منها كالعادة. يعني سأحاول أن أجيب على عدد من القضايا، وبشكل أساسي عن سؤال أولا حول سياق الثورة السورية. سياق الثورة السورية كما حكيت جوديت بوآن، ومرة أخرى اشتروا هذا الكراس لأنه مفيد جدا لفهم الثورة السورية وما يحصل اليوم في سوريا.
There were a number of questions asked and a number of points raised that I found very, very useful. I'm going to try to focus in my response on
3 points.
On a few points, and the first of them is by the pamphlet. Thank you.
بما يخص سأتحدث قليلا عن الأكراد، وسياق الثورة السورية أكيد جاء بسياق إقليمي يعني كما وجدنا، يعني ولنفس الأسباب تقريبا أنظمة سياسية مستبدة وتقريبا عائلية لنخبة مستبدة احتكرت السلطة والثروة في نفس الوقت وفاسدة.
And it is absolutely correct that the Syrian revolution came in a context of wider revolutions and uprisings in the Middle East, and that the broad reasons were similar in the sense that we have dictatorial regimes that really have a monopoly on public space, on any form of expression, on any form of organization, but also have a monopoly on the material resources. So you've got a very corrupt, dictatorial, repressive elite.
مع سياسات نيوليبرالية متوحشة كانت أكثر شدة في سوريا بزمن بشار الأسد منذ عام 2010 مما كانت عليه في أي بلد آخر في المنطقة.
2010 ولا 2000؟
لا 2000 يعني لغاية 2010.
Okay. And this was all happening at the same time as very, very harsh neoliberal reforms that reached their summit during the 10 years of Bashar's rule between 2000 and 2010.
فقط للتذكير، وأنا سبقا ذكرت ذلك وكتبته، أنه عندما جاء بشار الأسد للحكم عام 2000 كان نسبة الفقراء في سوريا حسب إحصائيات الأمم المتحدة 11%.
When Bashar came to power in the year when Bashar came to power in the year 2000, the poverty rate in Syria was 11%.
بعد 10 سنوات 2010 33% من سكان سوريا أصبحوا تحت خط الفقر.
In 2010 it had become 33%. This is all from the same UN source.
يعني هذا باختصار يعني
This really sums up the effect of neoliberal policies.
هلا نحن طرحنا في البداية منذ بداية الثورة شعار رئيسي هام بالنسبة لنا اليسار الثوري، هو لا واشنطن ولا موسكو لا طهران ولا الرياض.
One of our principal slogans as a revolutionary left during the beginning of the revolution in Syria was neither Washington nor Moscow and neither Tehran nor Riyadh.
هذه 2011 وأثبتت الأحداث في الواقع على أن هذا السياق وهذا الوعي اللي كان موجود عند عدد من الثوريين السوريين وليس نحن فقط كان صحيحا يعني.
And this slogan was came in 2011, and I think that the subsequent events and the situation today vindicated this view that was shared by many Syrian revolutionaries beyond our own ranks.
هلا نحن بما يخص اليسار بشكل عام العالمي الذي وقف مع النظام السوري ومع المذبحة التي مارسها النظام السوري ضد الشعب السوري، عندنا كان دائما تساؤل، يعني يطرح في نفسنا تساؤل: هل يعقل لأسباب جيوسياسية استراتيجية هذه بعيدة عن البشر أن نتجاهل هذا في أحسن الأحوال، أو أن نقبل بأن يقوم نظام تحت أي شعار كان حتى لو كان الاشتراكية أن يذبح شعبه؟ هل يمكن ليساري اشتراكي أن يقوم بذلك؟
With regards to the two sections of the international left that still support Bashar al-Assad, our question is, and it's obviously a rhetorical question, can we, for geopolitical reasons and geostrategic reasons or perceived geopolitical reasons that have nothing to do with the reality of ordinary people on the ground, can we support basically support and accept a massacre of a whole people, even if the regime doing this massacre claims to be socialist, progressive, etc.? How can we accept this as a left?
باسم الاشتراكية، باسم الماركسية، باسم الأخلاق، باسم الإنسانية، باسم المسيحية، باسم الكفر، بأي منطق ممكن أن نقبل ذلك؟
Yeah, how can we accept this in the name of the left, in the name of socialism, in the name of Marxism, in the name of any kind of morality? This cannot be accepted.
على هذا النوع من اليسار أن يشعر بالعار.
This left should be ashamed of itself.
بما يخص الأكراد في الواقع كلمتين، يعني البعض يقول أن هناك ثورة في روجافا، الثورة السورية لم تعد هناك في ثورة سورية، توجد الثورة السورية في روجافا يعني كردستان.
About the Kurdish question, a few words. Some are saying that the revolution in Syria is dead, but there is a revolution today in Rojava or Syrian Kurdistan.
فلنقول التالي، يعني كلمتين. أولا نحن نقف مع حقوق الشعب الكردي القومية والسياسية والثقافية ومنها حقه في الانفصال.
First of all, let me be very clear. We are in total support of the right of the Kurdish people for national, political, cultural self-emancipation, and this would include eventually a separation from the Syrian state.
منها حقه، لا ندعو إلى ذلك، ولكن نحن نقبل بحقه بالانفصال.
We do not we do not particularly call for this, but we respect the Kurdish people's right to decide this.
ولكن ما يحصل هو حركة تحرر قومي. هذه الحركة هي حركة تحرر قومي جاءت بسياق ثورة فتحت حررت كل المكونات الموجودة في المجتمع منها حقوق الأكراد، يعني الحركة الوطنية.
What's happening today is a national liberation process that's happening in the context of a Syrian revolution that really allowed for this to happen in the first place.
ما يقوم به ما يحصل في روجافا هو في الواقع يعني في تسميات كثيرة، يعني الإدارة الذاتية الديمقراطية والكونفدرالية الديمقراطية. نحن نرى أن هذه التسميات جميلة ولكنها تأتي من فوق من حزب وليست من الأسفل من الجماهير، وهذا نقدنا الأول عليها. يعني
we hear a lot of talk of self-rule and self-emancipation in Rojava or independent confederation, Those are, pretty words, as they say, but we believe that they come from above, from a certain political party, and not from the masses from below.
وبالتالي يعني هذه العلاقة هي بهذا الشكل. نحن لنا علاقة تحالفية مع الحركة القومية الكردية مهما كانت قيادتها، ولكن ليست هي الدينامية الثورية القائمة اليوم في سوريا.
So our situation is we are in an alliance with the Kurdish national movement, whoever the leadership may be, but we do not think that this leadership represents the dynamics of the Syrian revolution.
ما بعرف إذا كان جوابي واضح يعني. على العموم هلا بما يخص الدور النظام السوري، حكت آن على أن النظام السوري عنيف وعمل بروفا أولى له في حماة. لم يفعل فقط في حماة هذا الدمار الكبير، لقد جربه لمدة عقود من الزمن في لبنان، وتل الزعتر والمخيمات والحركة الوطنية الفلسطينية واليسار اللبناني سحق يعني لبنان لمدة عقود من الزمن.
Yeah, Anne Alexander mentioned Hama in 1982 as kind of a dress rehearsal for the mass destruction and the scorched earth policy. But Ghayath is arguing that actually it even started during their intervention in the Lebanese civil war, where they completely obliterated
76,
in 1976 that was, where they obliterated the Palestinian camp of Tal Zatar and other camps and the Palestinian national movement and the Lebanese left as well.
روسيا لا يمكن أن تنتصر على داعش، لا روسيا ولا الولايات المتحدة. أحد لا يمكن أن ينتصر على ما كان سببا بسياساته بولادته.
Russia and the US cannot defeat ISIS simply because they are, and their imperialist logic is one of the reasons why ISIS came into being in the first place.
ISIS هي بنت التدخل والخراب الأمريكي السياسي الأمريكية في العراق والمنطقة.
ISIS is the offspring of the American imperialist intervention and the chaos that ensued.
وبالمفارقة عندما حررت القوات الكردية كوباني، هل تعرفون ماذا تشبه كوباني كمدينة؟
And as an example, I mean, even when the Kurdish forces were able to liberate Kobani, do you know what Kobani looked like after this?
دمار، خراب، ليست مدينة كوباني، خراب.
It was completely destroyed. It was a field of ruins. It wasn't really a city anymore.
هذا ما حصل، هذا هو التدخل الأمريكي ولا الروسي، خراب ودمار وقتل فقط لا شيء آخر.
Yeah, either way it goes, this is what the American or Russian imperialist intervention is at the end of the day. It's destruction.
وكل منطقة تقدم فيها القوات الأمريكية أو الروسية لتحريرها تحرر خراب. ما في شيء آخر.
And every zone, every region that the American or the Russian forces are pretend liberating, they're simply liberating a field of ruins. They're destroying it anyway in the process.
وهذا ما يجعل جزء أكبر وأكبر من السكان تتعاطف مع من يواجه أو يوضح أنه يواجه بحزم هذا العدوان المجرم الإمبريالي.
And this actually means that a lot of people might be driven to support anyone who pretends or appears to be opposing those imperialism.
يعني هذا feedback ISIS.
So it really feeds back into ISIS's rhetoric.
حول الإسلاميين المعتدلين وجبهة النصرة، وهذا السؤال اللي طرحته الرفيقة.
On the moderate Islamists and the Nusra Front, etc.
بالتأكيد هناك في تمايز بين المجموعات الإسلامية الموجودة في سوريا العسكرية، أنا بحكي المسلحة، في تمايز.
There is definitely a contrast and difference between various Islamic armed groups.
هناك مجموعات مسلحة مسلمة، فإنها مسلمة بشكل عادي يعني، فقط هي مؤمنة يعني.
There are some armed groups that are simply Muslim and maybe pious people and religious believers.
أنا أعرف شخصيا مجموعة مسلحة كانت منذ عامين القائد تبعها اسمه جورج.
I know, for instance, an armed group whose leader is called George, which is
فهو
Christian.
كان يطلب دعم من اليسار لكفاحه.
And he was asking for support from the left.
ولكن لما اليسار لم يقدم دعما له فقال أنا مضطر أسمي نفسي أبو محمد.
And when he saw that there was no way to get support from the left, well, he adopted the pseudonym Abu Muhammad.
في ناس إذا مؤمنة وهذه عادية، مسألة الإيمان عادي، هذه في ألوية ومجموعات مسلحة عادية. لا بس في داعش، ايزيس وجبهة النصرة وأحرار الشام، هذه الأشكال الأساسية موجودة. وهذه لها فكر إيديولوجي معادي للحراك المستقل للجماهير وتفرض ممارسات اجتماعية.
And on the other side, you have groups like the Nusra Front and ISIS that are in complete opposition to the popular movement, and that are actually imposing certain social practices on people in the regions that they control.
الشكل البشع الأكبر بيناتها هي ايزيس، لهذا السبب لأنها تسحق أي شكل مستقل ولو مهما كان ضئيلا، لهذا السبب أنا سميتها لها طابع فاشي. أما جبهة النصرة وأحرار الشام تحتمل قليلا هذه المسألة، تعتقل تقتل أحدا. داعش تسحق، ممنوع، لا يوجد أي مكان.
ISIS has a completely tyrannical rule and seeks to completely obliterate any kind of attempt at democratic organization in the regions that it controls, which is why I said that it had fascist characteristics. On the other hand, groups like the Nusra Front or Ahrar al-Sham are a bit more lenient. They will, give and go. They will imprison activists sometimes. Sometimes they will allow activities to go on. So it's more varying. But ISIS are very, 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 very radical, and they will not allow anything.
بكل الأحوال لا حل في سوريا مع بقاء بشار الأسد ونظامه. وبالنسبة لنا نحن نتبنى مقولة لمهدي عامل: لست مهزوما ما دمت تقاوم.
And at the end of the day, to us, there is no solution in Syria while Bashar al-Assad is in power. And today we can adopt the Lebanese communist Mahdi Amel's saying is that you are not defeated as long as you are still resisting. Thank you.